One of the most difficult tasks for the field engineer today is dealing with relog data. In a scenario where data was not recorded over a given depth range, the field engineer has to remeasure the data over that range where the data is missing, and they call those relogs. If I go into the data sources, I have my original data, and the field engineer in this case has recorded a relog 1. The same data groups, curve groups, are in that data source. VDM handles this by versioning. This is version 0 of the data, and relog 1 is version 1 of the data. In the past, the engineer had to deal with copying and pasting curve data into Excel spreadsheets and manually putting it all together and creating a new XTF file. And it was a multi-hour process. That's if they were trying to merge these two data sets together. Plot Studio and Data Studio, through the use of VDM, are able to handle this in several different ways. For instance, if I go into the curve presentations, let's look at some curve data here in the main log. If I look at the one of the settings here is the source version. I'm going to tell it to select all of the curves on my presentation and change the source from the original data to relog 1. And now you see I'm only seeing the relog information and not the main. That's one way that they can use this information. They can just create a PDF, for example, of the relog. But typically what they want to do is see them both together, and that's called splicing. And you'll notice that there's a property here called zonation. That's a different table from the curve presentation. The frames represent the data that's going into a DLIS or a LAS file. It also has a zonation property. Right now both of these are blank. The zonation folder has never been populated. So if I scroll down into this empty area here, and then I go to the data sources, and since right now I've already got the main, the original data is already on the log, what I'm interested in is the relog. I'm going to drag it from the data sources panel to the layout designer and drop it on the zonation folder. Watch what happens here. And now that gap has been filled. That's called splicing. If I look at the curve presentation, you'll see that the zonation property has now been populated with the zonation that corresponds to the downhole group in this case. And if I go look at the frames, each of these curve groups are also populated. Each of the curves and the curve groups have their zonation property populated as well. So that means I can now generate a PDF and a DLIS that's been spliced. I'll generate a PDF first. In VDM there's a DLL called Log Curves DLL that does all of the rendering of curve data. It looked at that zonation table and it looked at the curve presentation information, and it said, oh, he wants to splice that zonation into this curve. And that's how this rendering took place. And it doesn't matter if it's on the screen or to a plotter. The splicing will take place automatically. We were at 2800 to 3000 before, where the gap was, and now you see that data is there. Same's true when I generate a DLIS, except it's not the curves DLL that's merging it graphically. It's the log regulator DLL that generates the DList file. That's doing the same thing that the log curves DLL did. It's looking at that zonation table, and it sees that in the frames definition that it's requesting that that splice be done using the zonation table. When I open this DList, there won't be a relog 1. There'll just be the original data. And as soon as it's open, you can see that the information has been spliced. If I go down to 2800, that gap has been filled. But the difference is there is no relog, just the original data. So it's physically spliced in the data that's being delivered to the customer. This is a huge savings for our field engineers. Instead of an operation that takes hours for a single relog, they can now do this in minutes. And if there's 50 relogs, the operation is the same. They just drag all of the relogs down in one drag and drop operation, and it splices all 50 of them. And there's no manual copying and pasting into Excel spreadsheets and rebuilding the whole project as a new set of XTFs anymore.